Hello.
Hello, Sylvia. Welcome.
Hello, hello.
And hello, Michael. Okay. Let's getting to roll. Okay. And Candy, good to see you. Okay. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, Rabbi.
Okay. So, welcome, and I believe our screen is shared. So, let's make sure. Okay, so let us begin. We are at 12:30 precisely. Good to see you all. So we begin a whole new book. So let's take a moment to talk about this book. So in essence, Breshit is an introduction to this story. Breshit is an introduction to the beginning of the story of the Jewish people. Breshit is about a family, uh, that begins with the whole world and ends with a family, and that family becomes a people. And in Shemot is where we actually become the Jewish people. We actually receive the Torah. We begin to hear the do's and don'ts and beliefs of Judaism. Because all the do's and don'ts, there are no, other than promises to our patriarchs, if you look at Breshit, all the do's and don'ts and beliefs and ideas and concepts we get from the behavior and the lives of the protagonists in the book of Genesis and from their relationships to each other. So, for example, we learn about how not to bear a grudge and not to take revenge and how the brothers treated Yosef or shouldn't have. We learn from Laban's behavior, but there's no statement, do not defraud someone, do not bear a grudge, love your fellow as yourself, and so on. That all begins with Shemot, and in particular after the giving of the Torah. Though in Egypt, it's, in other words, the concept of specific statements of live this way, behave this way, begin when the covenant of the Torah begins, which begins with this book. Whereas until now, it's been about God's interactions with individuals. And now it becomes a covenant and a relationship of God to a people that, as if it were, that relationship stands on its own. It's not ad hoc with each individual. And actually, it's something the Kabbalists talk about, that the particular quality of soul that a Jew has that enables them to fulfill the Torah and so on was sort of given out on an ad hoc basis to our patriarchs, to the tribes, to their spouses, and so on, until you get to Egypt, where it becomes about a people, and membership in the people is not ad hoc. It's about being born into or joining the people in a formal way. And this transition is indicated in the first few words of our Parsha and this new book of the Chumash. Ve'elu shemot b'nei Yisrael abayim Mitzrayma et Yaakov Ishuvei Shavo. So it begins, these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt with Yaakov. So they come as a family, each with their household. It's a group of individuals who have a relationship based on a promise for the future. In this book, the future becomes the present, becomes the reality. Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Yisachar, Zebulun, and Binyamin. Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. You have at this point, you have 11 children, and then so all the people descended from Yaakov were 70, and Yosef was already in Egypt. So we count him separately. And one of the point being that only in Egypt, as if it were, are they reunited. Now, this is a long time period. V'yamat Yosef v'chol Echav v'chol Ador. Joseph died, all his brothers, all that generation. It's a relatively long time. It's a good 100 years or so into this, close to 100 years into this sojourn in Egypt, as we talked about the other day. So a lot happens before they get enslaved. And this is a period probably of about 90 years or so. Uvenei Yisrael, and the children of Israel, Paru, they were fertile. Vayishtritzu, and they were prolific. Yishtritzu literally means they swarmed. Sheretz is the term used for rodents and lizards and worms and so on, things that have lots of kids and crawl close to the ground. Vayirbu v'yatzmu b'mod ma'od, and they became very abundant. Vatimala haaretz otam, and the land was filled with them. So one obvious question is, and I'll let you, and certainly put in your 2 cents, to be fruitful, to multiply, to become, v'yatzu means they increased, or it means they became strong actually, are all nice words. They're not, but v'yishtritzu, to swarm like the creepy crawlies, like the rodents, like the vermin. Yishtritzu, sheretz is vermin. Why do we use this terminology? There are many answers, and you might have your own. Why use this terminology? It's not nice. Anyone want to hazard a guess?
Well, my guess, pure guess, is that people have 2 sides and have the freedom of choice of deciding which side they're going to live their life on. In other words, the good and the evil, the right and the wrong.
So you actually, Sylvia, have hit upon something the Sforno says. Rabbi Ovadia Sforno, 16th century, very much a polymath in many fields, one of the great commentators of the Torah, very succinct and very deep. So I'll come back to that in a moment. A simple interpretation is that has to do with the way the Egyptians saw them. Rather than, look, the Jews came, the children of Israel, I should say, came, and they were helpful, and Joseph saved Egypt, and presumably they were good, productive citizens. But they multiplied very greatly, and the Egyptians saw this as an infestation. The Egyptians saw this as an infestation of people alien to them who they were uncomfortable with. Another interpretation, before I get to Sylvia's, is that they multiplied very rapidly, not in the normal order of things. At a time in history when there's a lot of infant mortality and so on, they had no infant mortality, basically, and had many children, which was common in those days, but they grew to adulthood. They didn't have infant mortality. By the way, I once did a table, just exponentially, in other words, if you have 70 and they get married, so they have, so the 70 plus their spouses will have, if they each have 10 children, they'll have 700 children, let's say. And the next generation is divided by 2 times 10, so they will have 3,500 children. The third generation will have, if they have 10 children that grow to adulthood, 35,000 divided by 2 would be 17,500. The next generation will have something on the order of 87,000, 88,000 children. So that's 4 generations. The next one will, the 5th generation will already be 40,000. And the 6th generation will be 2.2 million. So and how many generations of the Jewish people in Egypt? 210 years is about 10 generations. So there's plenty of time to get to 4 million or so if you don't have any infant mortality. So in other words, you don't need actual miraculous, you merely need the miracle of not having infant mortality. So the Jews' children survived at a very, very high rate, and that caused the Egyptians to saw them in a negative light. Another interpretation, again, is that their population increased in ways that did not happen in those days. By the way, nowadays that we have avoided infant mortality, thank God, and all those things, you do see this sort of thing. So, for example, She passed away at like the age of, I think she was 102, 101, not long ago. But 2 years before that, there was in all the Jewish papers and some of the secular ones online, there was a picture of a wedding before COVID. So there was this girl from Hungary who was taken to Auschwitz and survived. And she came into the Satmar community in Williamsburg as a young girl. She got married in the late 40s, mid to late 40s, when she arrived in America. And she had children. The children had children. So there was a picture of the whole family at a wedding, and just her and her descendants. She passed away. She had great grandchildren. So her and her descendants, minus their spouses, were 1,003 people. So in 4 generations, a lot can happen. So of course, that's the proper response to the terrible events of the Holocaust. But be that as it may, I think the point is that because it was naturally unusual, they saw it like the way, vermin multiply. And so it's either praiseworthy or not. Now we'll come to what Sylvia mentioned about free will. So the Sforno says that the exile in Egypt could have played itself out in many ways. One of the reasons it played itself out in such a harsh way, because God told Abraham his children will be enslaved and they will be oppressed. The question is how much, but that to some extent, the Jewish people, as often happens, because they were numerous and because they were successful and because they were wealthy, vayishritzu, they swarmed. Apropos of what Sylvia said, their behavior descended. In other words, rather than standing upright, they began to crawl on the ground. Their behavior descended to the level of the corruption of the Egyptian culture around them. Not completely, but nevertheless, they began to imitate Egyptian ways. They began to adopt Egyptian superstitions and beliefs. Maybe they adopted their value systems in their pursuit of wealth above all else, and so on. So they became affected by the milieu in which they lived. So vayishrutzu, they swarmed. What's the difference? A person walks upright, a creepy crawly swarms on the ground. So they lowered themselves to the level of the Egyptians, and that in turn brought upon them the harshness of the exile. This is what the Sforno says. Because ironically, and this is something, the Sforno lived in Italy, which is one of the few places where Jews could get away with in those days, sort of assimilating. And one of the things he observed is that the more Jews seek to imitate their host cultures, the more despised they are. And the more they stand up for who they really are, the more grudging respect they receive. So this all plays into this idea, because Egypt is the prototype of all the exiles we will have been through. And the question as to how to both contribute to the society and be engaged in it and attempt to be valued and appreciated, while at the same time not allowing yourself to leave who you uniquely are and who God calls you to be, is a challenge. And we always have to struggle with this challenge. And and more than that, the Sforno is not making this up in the 16th century. There are several midrashim that says that the land became full of them. It says they went to the circus, the Jews had the best seat. They went to the theater, the Jews had the best seats. In the fancy stores, the Jews bought the best cloth, and this began to annoy them because they felt the Jews were taking over, which is, again, it's an exaggerated thing, but certainly a claim that's been made. Now, had they, Pharaoh and the Egyptians might have hated them anyways, but there's this concept that we have to do what we can to contribute, yet remain uniquely who we are. And this has been a great challenge in this country, but at the same time, there's a lot of Jews who've successfully navigated that, of being engaged in society, being helpful to society, being devoted, to the welfare of the people and nation amongst which we live, yet retaining their identity as Jews. It's like it's like the Eruv. You live in a space the same as everyone else, but you're aware of a unique space that only you are aware of because it's so subtle, the Eruv. But it creates a space that you're aware of that governs our existence. It's a tremendous, useful metaphor. Okay. Yes, someone would say something. Okay. So that is today's little instant lunch and learn. Anyone have anything they want to say before we go?
I have a question.
Sure.
At the very beginning of your talk, you talked about they got the people that were going down to Egypt. They packed up all their people and their household. I heard you say household. By that, did you mean to say that they knew that they were going to never come back?
They knew they were going for a long time, yes, because it had already been predicted, and God gave Yaakov this talk, don't worry, ultimately you'll come back. So Yaakov knew that this was going to be a long journey, and that's what he told them.
Okay.
It's a good question, Sheila, and yes, this is absolutely the case that Yaakov and his children knew they were going away for a long time. Very, very good point. Anyone else? Okay, well then I wish you all a truly wonderful day. Thank you all for coming. And Candy, you say something because you're muted. You're muted, Candy. You're still muted for some reason. There, Candy, you're muted still. You have to unmute yourself. No, I can't hear a thing. It says, it's really bizarre. Let me try, hold on. Let me see something. No, I have full, you're not coming across. The mics fail often on Zoom. So.
Thank you.
Now I can hear you, go ahead.
I'm just saying thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thanks for joining us. It's such a pleasure to have you and everyone else. Have a most wonderful day and see you all, God willing, tomorrow. Take care.
Thank
Thank you,
you.